welcome to the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm your No Hair host, Mookie Spitz, and I've got heart to celebrate MLK Day 2026. Martin Luther King Jr. The I Have a Dream speech, August 28th, 1963. Let me quote, and forgive me for being infinitely less eloquent. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Come on, people, what's not to love about that sentiment? And of course, everything that is said and done then, and especially now, is being sliced and diced based on your own perspective, political beliefs, values. Some would say tribal indoctrination. Now, how I take that pretty direct, resonant, humanistic statement is that he was hoping for in America a United States thereof, where black people, brown people, people who had varied levels of melanin in their epidermis would be treated the same as everyone else. It doesn't matter. You're not judged by the color of your skin, but who you are as a person. Race neutrality. Race agnosticism. Nobody cares. Nobody cares if you're white, you're black, you're in between. Do you work hard? Are you an ethical person? Are you a good parent? Are you a good child? Do you mind your own business? Do you contribute to society? Rather than how you happen to look and everything associated with that. Not hard, folks. Not difficult. But as we know, the centerpiece of the second Trump administration is ostensibly focused on dismantling DEI and related programs. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. What can go wrong? Well, apparently a lot. Since Trump booted up his 2.0 administration, everything from the Department of Education overhaul to federal DEI offices, positions, programs, and activities deleted through executive order. DEI teams and websites have been stripped of their content. They've literally purged everything from whitehouse.gov to most of the public-facing communication from the U.S. government. They literally did a search replace or a search delete. Diversity, equity, inclusion, LGBTQ, transgendered. Bye-bye. The purges and personnel actions have hit everything from intelligence officers and military personnel to the Preventing Woke AI executive order. The USS Harvey Milk has been renamed. The Smithsonian has been chastised for an unflattering portrait of U.S. history. Look everywhere, and Trump is trying to de-woke America. Now, I bring this up not even from a political perspective, but just an ironic and even paradoxical one. Trump won the popular vote. He won all the swing states. You could slice and dice the demographic data, the voting percentages and ratios. But his victory was decisive, and it was to a large extent facilitated by record numbers of Black and Latin people flipping parties, coming out to vote, especially Black men. They saw in Trump an opportunity to ostensibly improve their economic situation. Trump has always been branded and associated with business acumen, going all the way back to his Apprentice TV days. He's the billionaire. He's the successful guy who's going to run America like a business and bring prosperity to all. And the details about impeachment or January 6th or even some of the explicitly racist subtext or overtone or dog whistle is secondary, tertiary, or non-existent to the concern of the pocketbook. I want to do better than I did under Biden, and under Biden it sucked. We had a zombie MIA president. We had inflation at record levels, largely as a result of pumping the economy with COVID relief after the fact, and a host of policies designed to ostensibly improve our quality of life, but with hundreds of billions pumped into infrastructure projects, for example, of which the general public saw next to nothing in terms of immediate or personal benefit. So what's happened, far as I can tell, is deep issues that were the bedrock of the civil rights movement, the Democrat Party, were sidelined to negligence to the point of malfeasance on the part of the Biden administration, at least in terms of perception, an ailing economy, far as consumers went, forgotten or revisionist history going back only a single administration, and a phenomenal marketing campaign that was a political campaign in disguise to re-elect Donald Trump with all of his promises to de-woke the government, tear down DEI, go against affirmative action, and basically dismantle decades of active effort on the part of the federal government to right the wrongs that MLK was addressing. Now, a lot of folks have looked at MLK's speech, and particularly that oft-quoted line, on the one hand, as taking color out of the equation when we think about, relate to, legislate, hire, and empower our fellow Americans. And on the other, tacitly assume that it's already the case and therefore unplug a lot of the efforts that are meant to single out minorities for special assistance. Now, here's where it's gotten kind of zany and contentious. There's a very strong feeling underlying all of these Trump executive decrees and orders that act as a kind of whiplash effect to ostensible progress that has been made. So the way I see it is the central tenet of the anti-woke, anti-DEI agenda is we have a level playing field. And even if we don't, if we single out any segment of the population for special treatment, especially based on race or even gender, and this could be and should be inclusive of sexual orientation, then we're perpetrating a kind of reverse racism that we are elevating and providing additional benefits to sleeves of the population in ways that are unfair to the collective. So if we have a DEI program or an affirmative action program, then we're actually going against what MLK was trying to get at, which is color blindness. So this aspirational goal of a race neutral or race agnostic United States of America is being seen as violative for the population as a whole. And this is not crazy talk. Pundits whom I respect, who are, by want of their born identity, cis African American people. For example, Coleman Hughes writes for the Free Press now. And then you've got John McWhorter of super liberal Columbia University, the linguist, are two great examples of super smart, super engaged African American intellectuals who see what Trump's doing, and not to speak for them, are more or less, yeah, that's right. You might be going about it heavy-handedly and awkwardly, and your messaging might stink, and you might be throwing red meat to your base in a way that comes across as crass and insensitive. But in principle, get rid of DEI, get rid of affirmative action. They'd side with the right-leaning justices, or the majority, the 6-3 majority in SCOTUS now, again, thanks to Trump, who are increasingly, from a judicial point of view, siding with Trump and this anti-woke, some would say hysteria, others would say long overdue enthusiasm and successful policy change. Now, I'm a white guy, as you could probably tell. I am the son of Hungarian Jewish emigres through Caracas, Venezuela, which has got its own timeliness and its own sense of irony now. I was born in Chicago, almost an anchor baby, at least in principle. My mom was already pregnant. I was conceived in Caracas. And I'm a U.S. citizen. I am white as hell. Don't ask me to dance. Don't ask me to sing. I do talk with my hands. And I have the Jewish component, which makes me something of a minority, but also gives me a certain leverage, and not in an Elders of Zion conspiratorial kind of way, but from a sheer demographic point of view, Jews tend to do better. We have a culture of education, a culture of business focus and empowerment, and that's not a stereotype, and that's not a Nick Fuentes racist observation that we control the world. We're born into a culture loaded with values that precipitate us getting into business, getting educated, loving the arts. Not all of us. I'm just saying that I come with privilege the melanin content of my skin makes me at the least palatable wherever I go, favored some places where I go. And being a Jew definitely hasn't hurt. Yes, I've encountered anti-Semitism, and that's its own thing here in 2026. But I'm just being straight up about this stuff, transparent about my benefits, being an air quote cis white Jewish dude in America in 2026. And I'm saying this up front just so you see or discern my own apparent implicit or even explicit biases. So there you have it. But the point of this solo rant is to try to wrap at least my own bald head around what the hell is going on, why things are so screwed up, and if there's a way out of this mess where specifically we keep radically oscillating from one extreme to another. So either we need reparations for slavery, and we need to have 86 genders to make official and define and help bring about the acceptance of the nuanced sexual realities that are out there. Or we could just call bullshit on that there are humans born men and women. A certain percentage of the population is born hermaphrodite. That we can fully accept that there's a difference, a categorical difference between sexual orientation and gender biology. But this idea that we need to throw gender into the garbage, and similarly that we need to throw race into the garbage, well, if we have any kind of common sense, and I would say even human decency, there's bullshit to be called on a lot of this. Extremism, this high concept, super academic, progressive liberalism. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge that systemic and often paralyzing racism continues to plague the country. It's the typical problem of most folks being unable to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, you can stress that many of these programs have been redundant and even destructive. Opportunity is there. Get an education, work hard, focus. You'll get opportunities based on, back to Martin Luther King Jr., the content of your character. And yes, as I'm chewing gum and saying that, I'm able to walk and see that the nation still has a long way to go with privilege, with power, and with prejudice. But again, it's been radical oscillation between one extreme and another. The transgender issue, to me, has become the fulcrum upon which this teeter-totter keeps radically flipping back and forth. So here's my belief, and I've ranted about this before. There's a segment of not only the population now, but throughout human history, who are born gay and transgendered. Read study what's been written, what's been experienced, everything from painting to theater to books. Gay people and transgender people are a natural segment of the human population, all human population. Sexual orientation and sexual identity are distinct, and yet we have seen every variation of this throughout all of human history. We could try to figure it out in terms of a social Darwinian benefit, but that's irrelevant. What's significant is simply to accept, devoid of judgment, that people are attracted to their same sex and that people are born in a body that they're not comfortable with. Full stop. Full stop. So for me, this becomes a civil rights issue. So having prejudice or bias or discriminating against an individual because of the quantity of melanin in their skin is as violative of human rights as similarly discriminating against a human based on whether they're attracted sexually to their same gender and or whether or not they are uncomfortable as their born gender and want to flip to the other gender. Full stop. So then the question becomes, because society has been so abusive and discriminatory, do we need to have special protection for these people? And here's where, again, it gets messy. And many arguments, pro and con, rear their head. Now, my opinion is that based on the innate nature of sexual orientation and gender identification and race, we need the government to level the playing field. And here's the caveat. At the same time, we need to do it in a manner which respects the personal freedoms and even religious expression and freedom of speech of people who disagree with that. Now, what I'm thinking of is the birthday cake case where a lesbian couple were denied service from a bakery because the baker felt, from a religious point of view, that a lesbian couple was not to their liking and refused service. Now, the libertarian in me, in addition to the humanist in me, is like, leave the baker alone. You could deny service to anyone you want to deny, and then you deal with the implications. The lesbian couple can go buy a cake somewhere else, and the baker can be impeded by word getting out that he or she does not want to serve lesbians, which could be beneficial or harmful to their business. I believe in that kind of free market. I believe in the free expression and the personal empowerment of people who run businesses. Now, there's a lot of layers to this: corporate behavior, what's acceptable. And I want to bring out Occam's razor really fast and whittle this down a little bit. I'm not here to get into a spaghetti bowl of legality. what I'm trying to illustrate is that things have gotten, to my point here, so complicated and so convoluted that basic common sense has flown out the window for both sides. Not just the right in terms of denying rights and singling out populations, such as the trans community. And the whole trans sports issue further complicates that. Or on the other side, you have an ostensibly progressive and humanistic focus that leads to patent absurdities in terms of policy and even cultural norms. I'll come right out and say that this she, her, he, him, they signature line bullshit is exactly that. It's ridiculous. What the actual F? I understand the sentiment behind it, but it's stupid. And you just heard me. I came out in defense of the unalienable and innate behavioral and physical characteristics of human beings and their right to be treated equally and fairly, but within the context of the broader societal realities that are inclusive of freedom of speech and personal freedom. Yes, like all relationships, it's complicated. And now, in the throes of the second Trump administration, you have holidays like MLK Jr. Day, which is looked at in some quarters despairingly or with disparaging intent. You have new holidays being created, which just smack in the face of progress made toward that more perfect union. And then you have a questioning of core values that don't just whisper, but that dog whistle racist intent. And then just to make things even more complicated, you have the freedom of speech reality, which is just so awesome, but that comes with a price, which, frankly, I'm willing to pay, and I think society overall should not only be willing to pay, but enthusiastically embrace. To bring all of this home and to make it tangible, I want to share a great story. And it comes from my friend Ken. Now, Ken and I placed Pulp Fiction, Tarantino's masterpiece from 1994, I think, at the top of our favorite movie list year after year. We often hang out in LA, bullshitting in diners, and like typical dudes, we recite the film's best lines, which are just so many. So, for example, out of nowhere, I'll ask Ken, "Are you Jewish?" And then Ken would respond, "No, man. I just don't dig on swine." Silly shit. I mean, I spent a big chunk of the 90s talking like John Travolta and Sam Jackson in that movie. Anyway, Ken is black. He's big and black. He is, by his own admission, a gun-toting liberal. He's reactive in that sense. He flies off the handle in his own way when he sees the Trump administration doing what it does. He's an old school Black Panther kind of guy, where if it came down to it, watch out. Because again, Ken is big and black, and he's not having it. That said, he's a middle class, bougie, kinda artsy dude. Not only to loving Pulp Fiction, but he's a movie freak. He's incredibly well read. He's knowledgeable. He's the professor in a college. The list goes on as to how, air quote, gentrified my friend Ken is, while having what would be considered far lefty opinions. Some would even say radical lefty opinions. And don't piss him off too much, because he's on the brink, especially these days. Now, as you can tell, I'm white. I'm white as hell. I can't dance. I talk with my hands. I'm Jewish, too. Am I practicing? No. But I love the theater. I love movies. I'm a writer. You get the picture. So, despite our differences, and because of them, through the looking glass of the Tarantino universe, we made for a pretty good Jules Winfield, Vincent Vega, Sam Jackson, John Travolta kind of dynamic duo. Even when we swap quotes from each of the characters, we cosplay based on race and identity. And the movie's so good, and neither one of us give a shit that we'll just throw lines back and forth as if we're either one. Now, we were introduced to each other nearly 20 years ago by our boss at the time at a staffing company, Andrea, and she's Canadian. So to add to this multicultural, multi-ethnic mix, diversity is an attitude we all embraced from day one. And we've all actually remained in touch all of these years since we met. And I love it. And I think that this is what America is really all about. And I haven't even talked about immigration yet. Now, have I? As there are right now ICE raids in Super Blue, Minneapolis, and then the local population is going nuts. And one thing is feeding off another, largely with the underpinnings of this backdrop that I've been presenting of race relations being so problematic to the point of incendiary in the United States in 2026. Anyway, an ingredient of my friendship glue with Ken is relatability. In this sense, he grew up in the rough DC neighborhood of Anacostia, while I survived the sketchier parts of Evanston, Illinois. I went to a junior high school, Skiles Junior High School, which was in Evanston, but close enough to the border of Skokie, Illinois. Yeah, that's Skokie, Illinois, where the Nazis marched, heavily Jewish population, ostensibly Hanukkah High School, ground zero. And Skiles Junior High School was this hotbed of lower income African American students, mostly, and middle class Jewish, mostly Jewish white kids from Skokie. And it was incendiary at times. And to me, it was an exotic, often alien and intimidating environment. Now I podcast and I can't shut the hell up, but in my middle school years, I was taciturn, shy. I suffered from some depression. I was kind of fat. I had big bottom glasses and greasy hair. I was socially awkward. I was a nerd. I was picked on. I was bullied. But I learned an awful lot about race in America, how volatile it could be, how problematic it could be. I understood and understand why white people can and often are freaked out. And on the flip side, I understand how Black people often feel like Chuck E. from Public Enemy, and how fear of a Black planet is a perspective that Black people feel. And they're not just projecting their paranoia on white people, white Americans, but it's real, it's palpable. So within this culture of systemic racism, you have hotbeds, these roiling cauldrons of racial tension. And I grew up within one, and I'm sensitive to it, while my friend Ken, he grew up in the ghetto, the tough part. Ken relates how his uncle answered the door of his home, opened it, and was shot dead. That's Ken's uncle. So he grew up with violence. He grew up in a neighborhood that was home and comfortable. But as he grew up, he just wanted no more of it. He got educated and got out of there. And perhaps in ways, I evolved from my background too, of this middle class, lower middle class, Skokie Evanston existence into and away from this kind of turmoil. But that doesn't mean that the turmoil hasn't continued and continues. Cue up your social media headline news feed. Anyway, that's the backdrop. And we had so much in common and have so much in common. And we're also both, as I mentioned, film and art dorks, science and technology geeks too. And each of us, just to pile on the relatability, disappointed our macho blue-collar dads. Ken's dad, I believe, worked for the post office, and he was disappointed that his big and black son liked to read more than he liked to do sports. And my father was a handyman and a factory supervisor with a tool bench in the basement, who was forever disappointed that his son read books and wanted an encyclopedia for his birthday and was completely inept. So we both felt that sense of disappointment and disenfranchisement. The people we looked up to felt contempt for us. And as we've moved into our adulthood, Ken likes to date redheaded white chicks. I like to date everybody. And he got out and I got out. And our friendship was based on acknowledging our similar upbringing, but we came at it from complementary, if opposite, points of view. Another character trait Ken and I have in common is posting our daily thoughts on social media. Neither one of us can shut the hell up. Neither one of us give a shit whether we have 100 likes and 100 shares, or nobody gives a shit about us not giving a shit. We use Facebook and some of the other platforms to spew regularly. We just let it out. And that's an aspect of our personality. Most people would think we're oversharers, but as far as we're concerned, again, no one needs to engage or pay attention. We just love for sharing's sake, which is like, We use social media like our diary. Ken plays games on TikTok. I rant as I'm ranting now in little clips, video clips every damn day. But again, it's like we're more similar than different. We come across different in execution and obviously appearance, but we've got all of this going on. Maybe because, like Malcolm Gladwell wrote, we're both outliers. We grew up strangers in a strange land, and true to Martin Luther King's comment, the human being and body see beyond race. We're all people, more similar than different, perhaps programmed to highlight those differences, much to our earlier success as a species and much to our dismay and perhaps destruction moving forward. So one of Ken's many endless shares, this one on Facebook, I think, featured a quick story that I just love. And I think you'll agree that it nails everything that I've been ranting about for the last half hour in a succinct and compelling way. So a Latina coworker of Ken's told him the story of how her 8-year-old daughter received an assignment in her public school to create a presentation for, drumroll please, Black History Month. And the goal of the presentation was to feature an African American that they admire. Now, could be a historical figure, someone who lived 100 years ago, could be a contemporary, could be a writer, could be an actor, could be a politician. Any African-American person that they admire, they need to put together a presentation. Talk a little bit about who they are, what they've done, and what that person means to them to the point where they have been selected as their featured African-American to admire for Black History Month. Now, the second grader was excited, further incentivized by the best projects being included in a showcase the following week. She was eager to make the cut. So after giving her choice ample thought and selecting the person they most admire, the young woman proudly announced her decision to her mom, who then couldn't help but laugh at her. "Mom," her daughter scoffed, "you can't laugh at Black History Month. That's racist." "I wasn't laughing at the holiday," her mother explained. "I was laughing that your choice of most admired African American is, of all people, Taylor Swift." "Why?" her daughter wondered. "I truly admire her." No irony, no joking, no hint of any mismatch here. And then her mom reminded her that, well, Taylor Swift is no doubt a person to admire by any stretch of the imagination, but she doesn't exactly fit the specification of an African American person to admire. So the second grader pushed back, "She's a woman I admire." "That counts." Sure," her mom added, "but not for your Black History Month project, right?" "You just don't get it," her daughter threw back. "Taylor Swift is so cool. I hope they pick my project for the showcase." Always supportive, as moms always are, her mother smiled, shrugged. Well, I'm sure you'll do a great project, sweetie, but be prepared because they might not pick yours for this particular showcase, for this particular celebration, for Black History Month appreciation. Her mother was simply reminding her of the rules, but couldn't convince her confused, slightly upset, but indefatigable and stubborn daughter, who went ahead and submitted Taylor Swift. Now, Ken was entertained by this story, which is presumably why he posted it. And I was entertained by Ken being entertained by his story. And I was also deeply moved by it. The more I thought about it, the more it moved me, and the more I liked it as an illustration of many of the paradoxes of what we're all dealing with now regarding race. And with that, it hinted at some of the ways we could get our asses out of this crazy woke, anti-woke sling. As Ken observes, the Latina daughter's choice of Taylor Swift as her most admired African American in celebration of Black History Month might ultimately be a good thing. I mean, think about it. After all, wasn't Martin Luther King Jr.'s grandest goal that of color blindness? Like, it's irrelevant what people are, going back to the quote, people are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Taylor Swift's character, the content of her character is, whether you like her music or not, well, she's going for it, right? She's a hardworking musician. Millions love her, adore her. She's done pretty well for herself. That's the content of her character. And, well, she just happens to be a white girl, a white woman. Color blindness, right? A just, fair, egalitarian American society. Choosing Taylor Swift, of all people, was also particularly glorious because it's hard to imagine anyone being whiter than her. Ken observed that Taylor Swift, of all people, is the superstar and veritable icon of white womanhood. As Ken literally observed, if you were going to explain what white woman is to someone unfamiliar with the concept, the quickest way these days to convey your meaning might be to say, you know, like Taylor Swift. Even relating that story now, I think that shit is funny. And I also think it's deeply meaningful. The Latina young lady trying to win the most admired African American for Black History Month contest nominated the coolest person she could think of and didn't for a second blanch or second guess herself when she chose Taylor Swift. The spirited second grader didn't need to be reminded how different we are. Instead, she reminds us how we're all the same. At least in terms of selection criteria, because clearly Taylor Swift isn't just like everyone else. She is the coolest. She is the person to most admire. So if you're celebrating Black History Month, you're celebrating history, humanity. Now, the cherry on top of this anti-racist, anti-woke story is Ken's observation about Kanye West, ostensibly also an African American, whom Ken observes the community tried to trade away a couple years ago. And by that, Ken is hinting at not only the Kardashian romantic hocus pocus and domestic unrest, to put it mildly, but the flat out anti-Semitic Nazi Hitler shit. And here Ken observes, I just don't remember who we got for him, he asks, looking for racial draft records, assuming there's a trade-off, right? Like, we'll trade out Kanye West because he no longer qualifies as one of our own. But we really didn't get any replacement. And all this begs the question of who's in, who's out, and what identity really means. Inclusive, celebratory, inspirational, and fabulous. Instead, having Taylor Swift on everyone's team is no doubt a win. Sometimes not knowing much about history is a good thing. Do you mind if we dance with your dates? Ah, the Eisenhower years, the 50s, where everything was amazing and it wasn't. And I think that that's a perfect segue to the Trump years, where a lot of the same mechanisms are going. Only the context is almost the opposite. During the Eisenhower years, America was in an historic growth spurt. We had just won not only the First World War, but the Second. We became the world's savior and number one superpower. We went from this backwash of a savage continent on the other side of the Atlantic, from glorious Europe, to the main force and de facto cop and diplomat and peace bringer of the planet. And despite having all of our own baggage, ethnically, racially, economically, that sheer momentum hurled us into the post-World War II years, where we built up a world order that up to this point has been fairly solid. Trump is not only questioning DEI and the woke agenda and basic tenets of civil rights reform, but he is questioning the global world order, NATO. What's our relationship to them? To Russia? Who is the enemy? Who is a friend? Bringing back the Monroe Doctrine. People are joking it's the Donroe Doctrine. Literally kidnapping the leader of a foreign country, my own Venezuela, Maduro and his wife, Delta team going in, scooping him up. Maduro is sitting in a Brooklyn jail right now. Science fiction. I'm a science fiction writer. Who saw that coming? I remember the fateful Friday night, Saturday morning, Pacific Standard Time, when my phone lit up. I'm up late. Venezuela, Caracas, explosions, being attacked. I didn't know what was going on. I thought that maybe this invasion is actually happening, that the resistance movement was much more significant than I had anticipated, and then they're really executing a coup or helping out a coup. But when the exclusive and amazing X video clips kept repeating themselves, and the explosions were limited to this handful of kinetic activities, then I started to realize that this is a more targeted operation. And then the news came out that Maduro himself had been yanked out of the palace. Unbelievable. And then now we're looking at Iran, the unrest in Iran, thousands killed, tens of thousands in prison, internet blackout. What's Trump going to do there? The Congress voting on restricting his authority as the executive to just wage war as he pleased. J.D. Vance, the swing vote, shooting that down. Greenland, part of that Don Roe doctrine. Trump saying we got to have it. The Danes saying, what the hell is going on? Me posting on TikTok, hoard your Lego. Crazy times ahead. What to make of this administration? Well, I'm a big advocate of taking things one issue, one policy, one directive, one action at a time. There's quite a bit to say for Maduro being yanked out of office. Other things to be said about his regime remaining in place, even though he's been kidnapped. There are other things to say about expanding American power shamelessly and directly. Many pundits are observing that prior administrations have been violative of international law, have lied to the UN, have done their dastardly deeds, but they did it within the context of a world order that they felt they needed to lie to and manipulate before they could get what they wanted. The difference with Trump here is that he just does it. And that's emblematic of the brashness that has evolved alongside our social media explosion. Consider even reputation management on the part of executives. I've been a PR expert for years, and the prior school of thinking is that you need to chew with your mouth closed and behave yourselves and not blend worlds. If you're the CEO of a company, you need to be impeccable, and you need to always consider yourself on record. Now compare that to Elon Musk, doing everything from supporting the ultra-right in Germany, of all places, to saying all the shit that he said on his own X platform, to being integrated then expelled from the Trump administration, only now to be ingratiating himself again. And all that while the board of directors of Tesla say, yeah, sure, let's give this guy $1 trillion equity package if he can double our revenue, get into robots. What does reputation mean anymore? Well, the answer is it's in flux, it's evolving, and the rules of the game have changed. You need to be adaptive. You need to be nimble. And words are words and deeds are deeds, and sometimes they're enmeshed and sometimes they're not. And there's a benefit to chaos, just as there's real problems with businesses being unable to plan and people living in a constant state of disruption. But I feel that a new normal is taking place here, where Trump, whether you love him or hate him, has de facto become the seminal icon of our age. When you combine his 2 terms and the length of his direct influence on the American political and most significantly media scene, it's been nonstop Trump bullshit and Trump opportunity since 2015. It's been over 10 years. When has a politician commanded this kind of attention for so long and to this extent and then wielded this measure of executive authority. The only person who really comes to mind in a commensurate way, at least as far as the power emanating from the Resolute desk, is FDR. FDR similarly steamrolled Congress, rammed executive orders down everyone's throats, redefined and restructured the federal government, only it's a looking glass Trump, the New Deal, socializing aspects of the government, exploding the size of the government, and creating a safety net that was deemed inconceivable. FDR was a revolutionary figure who basically performed a lot of the same or similar shenanigans that Trump is doing now. And much of what came after FDR had to do with curtailing executive authority pretty much until Richard Milhouse Nixon. And then the executive got his hands slapped. In retrospect, Nixon didn't have to resign. He resigned out of a respect and an acknowledgement that the decorum of the presidency and these unwritten credos were the bedrock of our institutions and our government. Stuff that not even Nixon could violate. Trump is like, fuck it. Let's go. And Nixon, rolling around in his grave, in hell or heaven, depending on how you look at him. In hell, I'll comfortably leave him there for now. He's spitting, going, why didn't I think of that? And meanwhile, all of us are caught wondering what's next with the National Guard deployed to cities. Again, bedrocks like posse comitatus thrown out the window. A lot of this is lip service. And then the judiciary, many of which has been flipped from a more Democrat base to a more Republican, again, thanks to Trump, at the appellate level, the circuit level, and even SCOTUS. Even if there's pushback, resistance to Trump's moves, it's taking months for the judiciary to often respond in any kind of meaningful way. And the jury's out as to whether Trump will even abide by the mandate of even the highest court in the land if it really came down to it. He's already talked about ways to circumvent their likely decision to take the power of the tariff away from him and give it back to where it belongs, namely Congress. Congress, far as I can tell, far as I checked, is responsible for levying taxes and controlling trade. And tariffs, far as I can tell, last I checked, is levying taxes and trade. So fuck out of here with that stuff. A president can't wake up and pop a couple Adderall and eat a quarter pounder and decide to arbitrarily tax countries, industries on the fly. Imagine if Trump were truly crazy. And if you're a lefty and you think he's nuts, well, you could easily imagine him being more nuts, right? And even if you're Republican, not even old school Buckley, but even a reasonable MAGA Republican, and there's some fissures in that core base, not enough to be substantive, but there are people griping not only about the Epstein files, but a president who could just arbitrarily wield the levers of commerce, exemplified in the Fed chair now receiving a criminal summons from Janine Pirro, where you have the Fox News hosts who are now running the government. It's amazing, but again, it depends on which side of the aisle you sit on. I don't think it's nearly as dysfunctional or dystopian as many on the left claim. And I know Minneapolis looks like a mess right now, and ICE is way over the top. And you can even go Bill Maher paranoid and say that Trump is assembling his own paramilitary private police force so that he could bury himself in the bunker of the new East Wing in 2028 and never leave. I don't know. Maybe that's a plan. But as far as the government keeping itself together, more or less operating, I see a lot of benefit to a lot of this craziness, and I need to slice and dice it one issue, one policy, one move at a time, even if it's all taking place at light speed, day to day, hour to hour, Trump gobbling up every headline. I wrote a blog post a couple years ago that Trump coming back would be like an enema for the United States and clean us out. And I believe that. I'm going to do another blog post where I talk about the Austrian philosopher Paul Feyerabend and the French philosopher Michel Foucault, and look at a force like Trump, this political anarchist, this transformative entity, and see the benefit of disruption. We get accustomed to certain models of reality and even our own human society, and we get comfortable and we take things for granted. Even our NATO relationship, the post-World War II order, you could say that what we haven't seen is more important than what we have. Namely, we haven't seen World War III and nuclear annihilation, and that's arguably, by any stretch of the imagination, a very, very good thing. But there are prices that we've paid for this staid, conventional, traditional paradigm that we consider the post-World War II order, and shaking it up, going against method, as Feyerabend would say. Just reevaluating even our core principles, even if it's wrong, even if it's violative in significant or foundational ways, I think has value that brings a lot of benefit to society and even to us as individuals. And the reason I'm going off on all this stuff is because it has repercussions in, drumroll please, our opinions about race. When I think about the writing of Coleman Hughes and John McWhorter, African American intellectuals, I like their writing. I like their thinking. They say stuff and do stuff that I really can't, just because I am this cis white Jewish guy. And to me, it makes sense, which is if you really believe in what Martin Luther King was espousing, and that is the true end goal, then it becomes increasingly difficult to justify the training wheels and the self-sabotage, the willful handicapping that we place on segments of society with the ostensible goal of righting wrongs of our history and our culture and our politics and our laws. So round and round it goes. But I think more so than anything, and perhaps I'm Pollyanna, and perhaps my optimism is a obvious byproduct of my privilege. I'm not trying to virtue signal here, either consciously or unconsciously. I'm just trying to look at the bright side and have to conclude that you fall into two camps. You're either overwhelmed and outraged, or you're celebrating from the sidelines, rah, 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 go home team. But there's a third possibility, which I think is the best way, most productive, healthiest way to look at the disruption that we're living through right now. And that is to not necessarily embrace all the craziness, let alone agree with its disparate and often mutually contradictory forces and opinions, but realize that in this roiling cauldron of argument and disruption, there's epic opportunity for transformation and self-awareness. I have to go Nietzschean about this kind of stuff. We live in a culture and a society that's in the truest Nietzschean sense beyond good and evil. It's realpolitik and very utilitarian in ways. It's the law of the jungle, where if you got the biggest army, you just do whatever you want. And that's scary in its own way. But given the context of this veneer of international law and a lot of the hypocrisy that's been behind that, I think this is refreshing. It's exciting. It's transformative. It's a way of cutting through the bullshit, getting to the essence of things, even if you disagree with it and even if you consider it morally abhorrent. And it's a period of intense acceleration where you could lie to the UN for a year and then wage an illegal and self-destructive war, or you could just go and kidnap the leader of another country and see what happens. And as others have observed, much of this is a consequence of the immediacy and kinetic nature of our digital communication tools, where the news cycle is faster, everyone is a content creator, and it's like, woo! No one's got time to just sit in the big comfy chair and take it all in. It's multitasking and multi-purposing, and let's just get to it and let's get it done. And if it breaks, we could fix it. If it breaks again, we could fix it again. And then if it breaks, we don't even need to fix it. We just need to ignore it because the next thing is about to pop anyway. I had a wonderful guest on my other podcast, Bald Ambition. It's for Tino Reviews on TikTok. We're former colleagues and we've known each other for years. And I rant my political stuff and cultural stuff on TikTok. And he has similar short bits, anywhere from like a minute to 2 minutes. And he reviews electronics, gadgets, and other kind of dude bro content, products and services like LED lighting and car gadgets and tchotchkes. Tino Reviews. And he remarked during our conversation that his biggest fan is his mom. And his mom sits there on the couch, and she's what we used to call in marketing the omni-channel consumer. So Tino's mom loves Tino, loves his boy Tino, and she's got 2 iPads, and she's watching the big screen TV, and she's got her smartphone. So she's got 4 screens. And Tino's not being facetious, I don't think. I think, Tino's mom has 4 simultaneous viewing experiences. And on most, if not all these screens, she's got her boy Tino on YouTube reviewing LEDs and speakers and miscellaneous stuff, of which he's got a whole garage turning into a warehouse full of these items that are sent to him by product creators for him to create influencer content for. And Tino was joking that mom goes to hang out with the other moms, and one mom says, "Oh, my son is an astronaut," or "My son is an investment banker," and then Tino's mom says, "Oh yeah, that's nice, but my son is on YouTube." And that is just so awesome. That is really, really cool. And it's emblematic of our age, which is this age of attention. And why the F am I talking about all this when I started this focusing on MLK Day and Black History Month and race issues in America and all this kind of stuff? I think this is our saving grace, folks, and I really, really mean it. That out of this digital chaos and out of our Nietzschean revaluation of all values, we're getting punched in the face and we're getting forced to again, in a Nietzschean turn, knock on the hollow sculptures of the idols, the twilight of the idols. They had these statues of these pagan idols, and inside there's just a hollow shell. We're entering a new age of value revaluation, and it's a postmodern, post World War II society, politics, culture that's hyper accelerated, that tolerates failure because to a large extent it's not even noticed. The downside is epistemological, of course. We don't even know what's true anymore. Falsehood rages with 10x, 100x acceleration and enthusiasm online in ways people are getting more stupid while they're encountering and engaging with more content than ever before. And now throw AI into this mix, where a recent study, I don't know if it's just, more academic bullshit, but a recent study demonstrated that cognitive abilities actually go down when the AIs are doing the heavy lifting. And I would say that, even though I love AI, I approach the use of it from the vantage point of spending decades working really hard to learn stuff. I'm a bibliophile and a geek, and I think I understand science and civics and history. But ask, your fellow American where Venezuela on the map is, let alone Ukraine, and chances are 95% of folks won't be able to identify it even reasonably close on a map. So you have all this misinformation being hurled into and throughout a misinformed, undereducated population. What could go wrong? But again, I think that the cool part about all this is our tolerance for the institutionalized axiomatic order is now vaporizing. And this could spell our disaster, but it could also be the harbinger of a brave new world where we could buttress our skepticism and paranoia with a freedom that even a generation or two ago would be unheard of, a freedom of thinking and doing. A lot is made of the dichotomy between scarcity and abundance. And Ezra Klein over at NYT, that guy's come a long way since almost frothing at the mouth liberal blogger to this very professional, very balanced journalist and commentator. Anyway, he wrote a book, Abundance, and he points to some of the flaws in the Democrat agenda where in principle it's great. We want more and more and more and more, but we just can't deliver. And then in contrast, the MAGA Republicans are a principle based on scarcity, which is we need to, decouple from the global business stage. We need to stake our own claim. We need to cut government. We need to reduce, 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 reduce. And I think that this digital explosion of content is an abundance enthusiasm. And for that reason, I think it's healthy, even though it comes with these caveats of the end of truth, which, by the way, is very much a Nietzschean concept too. Misogynist Nietzsche, beginning beyond good and evil. What if truth were a woman? Right? I mean, part of us is, come on, Fritz. But on the other sense is what he's trying to get at. What if truth itself would be capricious? And this is a harbinger even of quantum mechanics. What if the backbone of reality itself is stochastic? And that's intriguing. So if you want to get closer to truth, you need to de-truthify yourself. And although that's loaded with contradiction and irony, almost in a Godelian, self-referential sense, I think it's really, really healthy and exciting. And no pain, no gain, folks. Feyerabend himself argued that he knew that trashing the scientific method, at least in terms of what's possible and from an exploratory point of view, he knew it would result in tons of bullshit. But that's a small price to pay for really figuring out how quantum mechanics and Einsteinian gravity are connected. You got to think out of the box, propose new experiments, get out of this framework, induce revolution. So, the structure of scientific revolutions by Kuhn, another classic. That's Nietzsche in its own way. It's like the birth of tragedy through the lens of scientific epistemology and transformation. All this shit is not only fascinating and exciting and cohesive in its own way, but emblematic of the age that we're living through. And I think it's super cool. And I think one of its big benefits that we could celebrate on MLK Day 2026 is that it forces us out of the race box. It destroys identity politics as its core, because identity politics is a politics and an ideology of scarcity. You're undercutting yourself and your own opportunities by self-identifying as a subset of the species. And I think Democrats and liberals have been taught that that's an empowering feature set of an agenda and a messaging platform. And it sucks. It doesn't work. Black men voted for Trump because he was in the McDonald's drive-thru. He was entertaining to watch. He drove the garbage truck symbolizing the contempt of the opposition. He was fun and irreverent. And most significantly, he screamed abundance and success. The irony is that his economic agenda is being plagued by his idiotic tariffs. AI is the one propping up his economy, which could all just not only implode from an investment point of view, but the success of AI is undercutting the workforce that it's ostensibly benefiting in terms of that economy staying afloat. More ironies and paradoxes of this amazing age that we're living through and within. So when you look at race and identity through the lens of this disruptive chaos and exciting transformation, it's so old school. And again, I just want to emphasize that I'm not saying that the legacy, the shameful legacy of racism and inequality have really gone anywhere. Bernie Sanders was right from the beginning. It's hysterical how the Democrats have gone from marginalizing this guy for the working people of this country. And now it's the essence of every soundbite translated into air quote affordability. Of course, Trump calls it a hoax at his own detriment, parroting in a hysterical way Biden's biggest mistake for doing the same. Inflation? Oh no, we're doing great compared to how the rest of the world is doing. We're doing fabulous. Worked for no voter ever. Trump's doing the same thing, albeit for slightly different reasons, because he's still honoring the Cohen insistence on never apologizing and never giving him an inch. But I don't know. I think MLK himself would be astonished, outraged, and at the same time have a little glint in his eye, which is, I never would have thought this was the way to do it in a billion years. All roads seem to lead to Barack Obama, a black president. Really? Wow. But his second term kind of short-circuited that vision. I used to tell Ken, my buddy in the diner, that my biggest problem with Obama was that he didn't let the black out. So he knew that he was a historical anomaly and also a trailblazer. And going back to the Chris Rock comedy sketch, I believe on Saturday Night Live, where he comes up and goes, I'm going to vote for the whitest candidate I can. And that is Barack Hussein Obama. And then he showed a series of video clips and still images of Barack playing golf and his white step parents and the way he spoke and acted, the ultimate gentrified black man. He was palatable and enticing, and he had that magnetic charisma that made Obama Obama. But they tried to reactivate that stuff for the Democrat convention of the last election cycle. They brought back Barack and Michelle, and it was like, if you vote for Kamala and Waltz, it's going to be like Barack and Biden. It's going to be the good old years coming back, and their own constituents were like, get the fuck out of here. That's not the road to success. It's the road to ruin. Look at NAFTA. Look at the jobs. Look at the American economy. What have you done for us lately? And they voted for Trump. I'm not saying everyone did, but you know what I mean here. So to me, what's fascinating about this is if Obama was a dead end and the Democrats have to completely re-engineer themselves, then there's no better environment to do it in than in this atmosphere of total chaos. This Feyerabend style against civics. It's a revaluation of our core values, and where there's smoke, there's fire, and where there's fire, there's transformation. And where there's a backlash, there's going to be a backlash to that backlash with bravado, but hopefully picking up some skills along the way. It's like major league pitchers and the 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Babe Ruth would be annihilated these days. His fat ass out on the plate playing the New York Yankees in 2026, no, it ain't going to happen. And who knows, maybe politicians a generation from now will look back at this time as the true inflection point to a new way of messaging, a new way of reaching the American people, and even a new way of governing and a new world order. And let's just hope that Trump, with all of his intransigence, impulsiveness, mercurial wishy-washiness, and flip-floppiness, and dumb 19th century views such as the tariffs, won't do more lasting damage than what he does in terms of actually bringing about the environment, the circumstances, creating the petri dish for amazing change that could very well be net positive for everyone. And here's my kicker, folks, especially for the disenfranchised minorities for whom MLK and all of those guys and gals fought for. And that to me is super cool, super exciting, and fills me with hope, not dread, as, you know, immigration and customs enforcement go wild in American cities, and the threat of the Insurgency Act being invoked by the president gets activated. And as we go to war with a NATO country, and as we overextend ourselves militarily from a position of extreme cockiness and hubris, goes up, comes down, swings to the left, swings to the right. But almost in a Hegelian sense, I have to say there's this teleological kind of trajectory, which is going from the simple to the complex, from the stable to the disruptive. And I think kind of like Poincaré mathematics, if you look that shit up, and even Boltzmann, you have these mathematical situations that express themselves in the real world, where you have a situation that's very chaotic, and you spontaneously get patterns and order that seem to come out of nowhere, but is built into the math itself. And I therefore think that there's almost a mathematical certainty that interesting and hopefully positive things are going to come out of this mess, especially for folks who could benefit from it the most and have the least to this point. So happy MLK Day. Looking forward to Black History Month, and perhaps in the not too distant future, a Black History Month where Taylor Swift, hey, there's no disconnect whatsoever with featuring her as that young lady's most admired person. Like, comment, share. I'd love to hear from you. And I am going to rant about this Feyerabend, Michel Foucault, Friedrich Nietzsche disruption a little bit more, and peel that apart from the point of view of our opinions of each other and our ideologies, where you're in one tribe or the other tribe and it's a big sporting event, but it's just stupid, and we're missing that top line disruption that is just so exciting.